So welcome to today's podcast, where we're going to delve into the different kind of roles across the service, understand how the service has changed over the years, look at some of the impact of technology, leadership, and look into the future a bit more of what's in store for the service. So firstly, introduction. So my name is Molly and I work in the corporate communications team based in our headquarters at Portishead.
My name is Sam. I'm a watch manager in control training in Lansdowne, where our control is based.
Hello, my name is Simon Shilton. I'm the Chief Fire Officer and Chief Exec.
And I'm Jon Westwood. I'm operational watch manager. I'm based at Southmead Fire Station at the moment.
Lovely. So just to give some context, just in terms of where our roles sit. So where I work in the corporate communications team, we look after all internal communications, so keeping staff up to date on the latest news and events, and external communications as well. So dealing with local media, the press, the service's social media accounts, and working on things like prevention and safety campaigns as well to educate people on kind of how to keep safe at home, at work, or in the outdoors and things like that. And we're part of the wider Corporate Services Directorate, so that includes all things like estates, IT, procurement, corporate assurance, planning. And at headquarters, we've also got lots of other teams like health and safety, risk management, people services, finance, and lots of other teams as well that kind of all help the service function and importantly kind of support our prevention, protection and response teams to kind of get out there and keep local people safe. So what about you, Sam?
So I work in the control room. I'm the training officer for control staff, and that involves mostly control, but we do a lot of work with operational staff as well. A lot of work integrates with corporate staff as well. We're doing some really good collaborative work in. But the main function is we're the start point for all incidents. We take the 999 call, mobilise the appropriate resources and gather information. And then we'll support that incident throughout. We're recording the log for the incident, any messages that come in, any resources required for the incident to support the resolution, and record that all and train alongside it as well.
Amazing. So if someone calls 999, it's your team that will answer the call and make sure people get there to help them.
That's right, yeah. Like I said, we're the start point for the incident, and we're the ones who close it at the end, once everyone's all done their job and gone home.
Amazing. So, Jon, I suppose that ties in nicely to what you do.
Yeah, so I'm an operationally based watch manager. So that means that we lead and coordinate the response of an incident. So teams on the ground at fires and rescues, but also then the day-to-day running of a station and a watch. So just the admin-based stuff around having a watch on a station, the training and development of our staff as well, to make sure that they're ready to go to those incidents. That's a main part of our job, including fire safety initiatives, so hot topics like lithium-ion batteries, and find initiatives on how to support the prevention of fires and stop them happening in the first place. Community engagement activities, going into schools, educating the kids. Also, we did something recently with British Sign Language at school, at Elmfield School. It was really interesting. We went there and did a risk-based visit for the school, and just trying to engage with the kids there. It was heartbreaking not being able to communicate with them. So we spoke to the teachers about maybe us coming in and doing some work with the kids, and then the kids were teaching us certain phrases that we might use at incidents. It was a really good experience. Really sort of like heartwarming experience. So that's another part of it. It's a great job. It's like no day's the same. It's just a really interesting place to be. Yeah.
Amazing. And so Simon, how does that tie into what you do?
Yeah, so my job really is head of paid service really, although title is Chief Fire Officer and Chief Exec. What that means really is I'm responsible to ensuring that the organisation is able to deliver all of its legislative responsibilities. So when we talk about from Jon and Sam's perspective, part of the Fire Service Act is to ensure that we've got facilities to be able to receive 999 calls and mobilise resources. And likewise from Jon's perspective, making sure we have the right people with the right skills at the right time to be able to deal with whatever they're faced with. And how do I do that? Well, I structure that around lead the organisation through prevention, protection and response, building a resilient service. So we set that through understanding risk and the risk profile. We deliver that to our communities on behalf of the Fire Authority through our service plan. but also to ensure the legal compliance with other matters, such as good governance arrangements, health and safety, civil contingencies, as you say, all of your protection and Fire Safety Act, all legislative requirements around there, and ensuring that we shape the organisation, managing a £64 million budget as well, and managing those finances in the best way possible to ensure that we can continue to deliver those services. And I guess I'm the in-between between all of our staff, so corporate operational staff right the way across the organisation. I'm the link between our firefighter members. I'm responsible for engaging with local politicians, so our MPs on a local and national level, for ensuring that manage the finances, set a balanced budget, make representations around good funding for the Fire and Rescue Service, engage with our communities as well on a greater level, our partner agencies and our local authorities and organisations, police, ambulance, etc., and also on a national level and regional level, engaging with the chief officers and National Fire Chiefs Council. So quite a broad range, and I lead the Service Leadership Board and in turn the Service Leadership Team to deliver all of those functions. So huge amount of variety, fantastic job, huge privilege to undertake that job, but a huge amount of responsibility and diversity within that role.
So I feel like that's given a good context of kind of who we are and what we do. So over the years, there have been quite a lot of significant changes in the service. There's been lots of advancements in technology, evolving safety standards, changes to the risks that we're facing as a society, learning from incidents that we've been to, and a better understanding of different techniques and strategies to deal with that as well. And I'm sure those have kind of changed and shaped how we respond to emergencies. So, Simon, I suppose you've been with the service over 30 years now, and we've grown a lot in terms of equipment, training, professionalism. I suppose, what are the key things that are different to what operational firefighters do today?
Oh gosh, it's evolved enormously in my 32 years. So I started my career at Avon, and the day-to-day activity of firefighter then was very different. So there was no focus on prevention activity, as an example. So we didn't visit people's homes. We did school visits, Cubs and Scouts and Fates in the summer, those sort of things. And from a protection perspective, we did sort of site almost audits, if you like, but from a very limited perspective. In you almost had a tick box to go down and inspect the premises, had those reports from there. So technology was all at that time very much paper-based. Mobilising system still very similar now. We were notified of any fire calls via the station tannoy. We didn't have mobile data terminals. In fact, all of the information that we hold was collected locally and held in a ring binder. Even mapping systems, going through the A to Z. And looking through that, and part of the training for firefighters at that time was topography. We still do that now, of course, but we rely very much on technology. And I sound really old now, but not even mobile phones. Who can remember a time when we didn't have mobile phones? Crikey, they're part of our life now. Yeah. So I really sound very, very old. But as we are now, when you compare then and now, technology is all about driving what we do. If you think about the data that we use to understand risk profiling, we understand our communities a lot more. We use a lot of data sets from different agencies. And then, of course, if you look at more recent times with the technology around equipment and MDTs and the mobile data terminals, you've got all risk information on there. Mapping systems, location of hydrants, open water supplies, information on our policies and our procedures, and of course now the ability to be able to link from the fire ground into fire control. Drones is a prime example of that. So there's been a huge shift in technology and how data now drives our whole risk profiling and how we shape our service going forward. So enormous amount of change.
Absolutely. And so, Jon, obviously you're working on the fire engines now. I suppose, are there things that you recognise are kind of like new emerging risks today that kind of seem different today?
Yeah, emerging risks that there is. We'll go into that, I'm sure, in a minute. But the same as Simon, I joined in a time where it was map reading was a main skill, in sitting in the back of a truck, being bounced around, trying to read an A to Z. I used to get travel sick as a kid, and then so when I joined the fire service, no one told you about that. I'm sitting in the back of a fire engine, being thrown around, trying to read a map, trying to tell people where to go in a city I'm not familiar with. So such advances in technology, small, simple things, a phone, everyone's got a phone, helps you direct. They've just made lots of things easier. But then also bigger changes about the role of the fire service and of a firefighter, and the stigma that was always attached to being in the fire service and public perception of what we did, that everybody sat around playing pool, and that's what we did as a career. But we've had to fight against that, because that is not what happens on fire stations. There's so much more involved, national occupational standards, and driving the training and professionalism that we go through now. So it has changed, but we're always fighting against that stigma, or we have been. It still goes on now, still thinking about it. But then, so emerging risks, we're talking about lithium-ion batteries, that's a real new risk to us now. So the fires are changing, the environment that we're going out to is changing, that built environment that we're going out to is totally changed. I was fortunate enough that we hosted Avon Fire pensioners at Safety Fire Station recently. So we're sitting down chatting with some of the ex-firefighters from back in the day, and they were telling one of my firefighters in development about that they used to go to a house fire, and they remember sitting on a sofa in a fire watching it. Well, that just can't happen now, because the fires are happening so quick, and the materials that we've got within buildings are igniting and just developing the fire so much quicker that isn't. It just really highlighted to me that there was a different era. Not to take anything away from the challenges that they had back then, but firefighting today, it's a different beast that we're going in and firefighting against. And those lithium battery risks, they're just everywhere. I had a shout to a hospital the other day, and there was a robot in the hospital I knew nothing about. So we're going out to these things we're supposed to be an expert on already, and we have no idea about some of these things that are in there. There's a robot that exists in hospitals that go around picking up machinery, totally automated, picking up machinery and dropping it off at different locations, and then it will go and dock itself and charge itself, and it was overheating essentially. But these things are out there. We're just like trying to catch up with. Fires are developing faster than they ever have before. Residents have less time to get out sometimes now because of what's coming out of these products. The structures are becoming unsafe while they're working, and new hazards that we've never seen before. We've got to be experts on. It is a different beast, and these are the challenges we face. So we've got to be right on our game all the time. In my opinion.
But vehicle technology is another big one, really. You think about technology in vehicles now, and we now have access to a range of data and information on vehicles at our fingertips on the mobile data terminals, as an example, which give tactics and operational options to firefighters. And it's a real changing and evolving world, and response criteria and risks, as Jon articulated there. Lithium-ion batteries is a prime example around how technology is moving on and how that impacts on fire and rescue service, both in understanding risk but also in ensuring that we evolve by using data and technology as well.
Yeah, we've really got to keep up to date, haven't we? We've got to be on top of it, just forward thinking all the time, never stop. So
yeah, absolutely. And so Sam, how does that fit into kind of control and the journey that control have been on as well?
Well, to be honest, I think it goes hand in hand. I know Simon mentioned about the advances of MDT, so that's mobile data terminals. And again, I think when I joined, that was 17 years ago, there were no MDTs. It was all radio comms. It wasn't digital, and it's moved very fast, in my opinion, which is great. But something to be aware of that we've realised recently with our control staff is that we can't rely on it. And I think with new generations of firefighter control and staff coming through, I think a lot of the times we have an understanding that we've experienced life with no vehicle location and how we worked as a service then. And we communicated a lot more to say, a fire engine's going to a community fire safety visit, so we're aware exactly where it is, and we needed that understanding of how close that is to the next call coming in and things like that. Whereas now we rely on it a lot of the time, and it's brilliant because it gives us precise vehicle location and response times and things like that. But when that fails, there was a we had a real gap between our sort of new generational staff and our old generational staff, where they just went, well, we've done this before, we know what's going on, and our new generational staff were almost not panicking, but like they were unaware of the processes, and we need to really make sure that we're, you know, making sure everyone's on the ball and ready for that resilient level of performing for the public, really. So yeah, the changes in communications and control, liaising with staff and the members of the public, things like 999i, which is like a live stream video call, you know, that would have never been available when Simon started. but we can, you know, there's options out there, and we're investigating all of these different. There's another one called Good Sam, which is short for Good Samaritan. That's another app that you can jump onto the member of public's mobile phone, use their camera to see the live incident happening. And there's options out there that really could help with us, because the main role for us in the initial stages is that information gathering and sharing it with Jon and the crews as soon as possible. Is there lithium-ion batteries? We never used to have to ask that, and of course we do now. They're everywhere, like you said. Like right. you can't walk into a house without them around. And if they know they're involved, we've got to share that information as soon as possible. And again, give that safety advice to the other person at the end of the phone. But the training and the technology is developing to help us, so it's really beneficial, the kit that's coming in and the way we're using it, and again working together, and we can share that information as soon as we can, not just with our operational crews, with police and ambulance and partner agencies and things like that. We can say this is involved, we share that understanding, and they're advancing as well, and they might say they've got another bit of information, or they would deal with that slightly differently. You know, just say, I don't know, a lithium-ion battery burn. They might have special gel packs or something now that they'll you know, make sure that a response is going appropriately. So it's changed a lot. Yeah, it changed a lot. So 17 years ago I joined, and I think it's really exciting to see what new staff bring and new technology brings. But the resilience level of it is something that's really important, that we make sure we understand that we've got to be ready for should it not work on the day.
I think that's really interesting what you said about generationally, about the fallback of like the modern firefighter and firefighting control, about their resilience to not see how to fall back to paper and the rest of it, and that the old hands, as you say, would probably quite comfortably drop back into it because it's all they've known.
You could clearly see a definition in the room of, you know, those with sort of 10, 15 years plus were just, right, okay, let's go back to our...
Yeah, no panic,
Let's get the map out.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we talk about technology and data and you know, AI as well, artificial intelligence, and Jon mentioned about a robot being at the hospital. But there is no kind of substitute for human intervention, particularly in the world of firefighting. You know, it's so dynamic, and there's so many critical decisions that need to be made. And if you just think around, you know, what Sam was talking about there, around, you know, how important technology can be in assistance in decision making, but it can't create an evacuation plan, as an example. You know, when we talk about the advancements in understanding evacuation plans in high-rise buildings, how critical human intervention is in fire control, as well as relaying that communication and that information from the fire ground, so it's coordinated approach. So those messages are given to the residents that are calling on the phone, but also the messages are passed back to the firefighters on the incident ground, so they know where to prioritise their activities. So there's no substitute, regardless of all the technology that's out there. It helps and it assists and it's advanced us enormously, but it's equally working alongside, you know, what is real around human intervention.
Yeah, 100%.
And has that kind of increase in data and advances in systems, equipment, things like that, helped you in terms of strategic decision making and planning for the service?
Yeah, you know, we use a software called CAD Corp, and CAD Corp takes a whole load of information into it, risk information. So it takes your demographic of your local area, it takes incident data, it takes risk profiling of if you have got motorway risk, water risk, all those different elements. It even uses health data at times, you know, extra data, and that puts all that into an algorithm of this huge amount of computer software. That enables us to make you know, key decisions about how we manage risk. We're all about managing risk. You're never going to eradicate all the risk, but it's the mitigations you put in place to reduce that risk. So technology from that perspective and bringing that into the fore does absolutely help shape strategic understanding of your risk profile as your service and how you make strategic decisions to make sure you've got the right resources in the right place at the right time to deal with all of a whole range of risks that we talked about earlier on.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So just moving on, in terms of leadership in the service and kind of the management and the leaders that we've got within the service. Obviously, we've invested a lot into leadership and the development of staff in recent years. Corporately, we've seen staff take on new leadership roles, and our recent leadership academy has seen some of that success kind of take off a bit more. But obviously, leadership and management in a corporate world where most of us are kind of dealing with issues from our desks and things like that is very different to that of kind of what you're seeing on the fire ground. So, Jon, I suppose just from your perspective around as being watch manager, you're leading teams on the ground, you're then managing people back on station. Like, how do you feel that your leadership plays into that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different hats that you have to wear. Certainly, I think in this position as being a leader within the fire service, there's different hats, and we talk about being on an incident ground. You might have to be that autocratic leader where it's a one-way conversation, where you're very much telling someone that they need to do something without having that two-way communication. And that's what it needs to be. It's at times, not all the time, but at times on the incident ground, that is how it has to be. But I think in the past, we've suffered with leaders out on that fire ground with that autocratic style, bringing that back into day-to-day running of watch of a fire station. And that's not particularly a healthy place to be. I've been in the fire service for 20 years, so I've been through good leaders and bad leaders, and I think you learn as much from serving underneath a bad leader as you do serving under a good leader, as in picking up traits and skill sets. But yeah, you just have to have a lot of different skill sets now. It's about building those relationships, interpersonal skills, being empathetic. And once you realise leadership isn't about you, it's about other people. It's about allowing people to thrive and giving them the tools to be themselves and develop. That's a real light bulb moment where you realise that's what leadership's about. It's not about you. And there's no point in being like the shining beacon of something. You need everyone to be with you. So build everybody else up to be that big, strong team that you want them to be. Is what I see leadership as. And like you say, yeah, we are investing a lot in leadership. There's people that are natural leaders. There's people that are leaders outside of work as well. Do you know what I mean? Probably my first position of leadership was a captain of a football team, and that's quite. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it is quite an important thing, trying to build that morale, the G people up. So that was my sort of first introduction into it. I guess when I look back.
Yeah, there's some really valid points there, particularly as I reflect on my time in the Fire and Rescue Service. Leadership was very much heavily weighted towards operational competence. So there was many years ago, perhaps someone who was a good leader was operationally competent and was excellent on the fire ground, directing staff. But that's directing their teams to achieve an outcome. And that's a really valid point. Jon sort of observed there and raised around. Often that's more of a directive style on the fire ground, often because it needs to, and it's a really important part of leadership in our role, in our sector. But it's, one size doesn't fit all. And if I reflect, probably the area that has been quite a significant amount of advancement in the last few years is the leadership that is outside of that operational risk critical environment. And the investment in that, which has been underinvested in over recent times, because it's a very different style, and you have to be more adaptive for leading as a head of, if you like, a department or a team or a watch to that on the fire ground. And it is about people that Jon's articulated there, and it's less about you. It's how you get the best out of others. There's also an element of setting direction as well. But for me, I think that's been quite evolving. Even now, we have, from a fire and rescue sector, we have the National Fire and Rescue Service Leadership and NFCC Leadership Framework. We have leading the sector standards now as well. So there's a lot of focus that moves away from an operational competency style of leadership to a more corporate style of leadership, and how you develop individuals and teams and get the most out of each other, really. And in turn, other people will then have a more fulfilled career themselves and achieve their ambitions and their potential and reach their potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, Sam, I suppose in the control room as well, it can be quite a high pressure environment. There can be, a lot going on, 999 calls being answered, talking and reassuring members of the public, mobilising fire engines and things like that. And I suppose, how do you find kind of managing that stress in your team and supporting your team throughout these stressful times?
You're right. It can be definitely high pressure at points, and I think both Simon and Jon's points. Jon said about you have to wear many hats, and it's absolutely true, because, like you said, in control, it's kind of a unique environment, because we're in a room together for a 15-hour night shift at times, and that's your downtime, your battleground. You eat together. You spend longer there together than you see your family for the duration of a tour. But we make it work with the good relationships already built. And like Simon said, that it was often focused on operational incidents and things like that. But the reality is, thankfully, most of the time is not operationally managing. You've got incidents for short periods of time which are, real high pressure, critical incidents, and there's decisions that need to be made that are autocratic, and you're directive, and you say, I need this done now, quickly please. And if it's done, great. If it's not, we can talk about it afterwards. But right now, I'm accountable, I'm responsible, so please do that for me. If you disagree with me, we'll talk about it later. But like I said, in control, if me and you were working in control and we had a disagreement in the morning, then that rest of that day shift could be difficult, because we've got to sit next to each other. So that's really difficult to manage, and a good leader will do that very well. And again, they build that environment that people can get on with it professionally, even when they're not getting on, or disagree on like the best friend's character or whatever it is. So the high pressure environment within the control room is definitely difficult to manage at times, and but all the investment that happens strategically, like these courses we're doing, and the training that's happening, it's casting a wider eye to
Softer
the whole
skills.
100%, and it's invaluable. And that, for me, from where I was to now, I take so much from the investment that we've had from the service, and I apply it every day. And like I said, most of the time, not operationally, it's about the downtime when your colleagues having a difficult time or anything like that, and managing that sort of, or a stressful assignment or something like that. That's really difficult to do when you're used to focusing on the fireground and incidents, and it's time critical, and do this, do that. When it's the softer side of it is really difficult to manage. But the investment has been phenomenal, and I value it massively.
And people engage with different types of behaviour, don't they? With the way that you communicate with them. I think of transformational leadership, where you're almost like a social chameleon around people. You change the way you talk to certain people, and some people, it's like the old adage of the arm around the shoulder, or the pointing finger, telling them they need to sort it out. And different people react differently to different things. You've got to have that in your toolbox to be able to use.
And that's built on the relationships you've already made.
Yeah, that's right. Long establishing those
what's
relationships.
Happening. Yeah,
that's
you know what Jon likes, and you know what Simon likes, and if you've got good relationships and you've got that good environment already built, then you know how to react to different, or same events, but differently for different people, definitely.
Yeah, and it's also about having maturity. You haven't got all the answers. Everyone thinks as a leader, you've got all the answers. And I think that's a dangerous place to be, if you think you've got all the answers as well, because we're all only humans. And it's also how you utilise the skill set around you and maximise that skill set around you in order to sort of come to a, particularly if you've got to make a decision as a leader, the skill set is taking on board all of that information so you can come to, the right decision at the end. And that might mean that you haven't got all the answers, but you gain and use the expertise within your team to reach an outcome or an answer from that perspective. And it's very much around that softer side which we haven't always focused on. And this stigma around being a leader, there must be bravado attached to it. You know, everyone's got vulnerabilities, and I also think it's something when you also show those vulnerabilities that sometimes you haven't got all the answers, but it's using your team to find that way through.
Yeah, definitely. I think working in what you'd label high-performing teams, I worked with some of them, and it's about the individuals within that team. It's not about me that's been maybe the spearhead of that team. It's about everybody else around there solving the problems together, and their importance within that role, and then knowing they're part of that team.
Yeah, and you very much get the buy-in as well. You know, you get a better outcome. You know, more often than not, you'll get a much better outcome.
Yeah, definitely.
And is there any advice that you'd kind of give anybody in the service or in other sectors, other roles that's kind of looking to progress that you think would help them in terms of leadership and management in the future?
I think that's one for you.
Is that one for me? Okay, all right. I think, look, you know, just ensure that, as I said, really, you haven't got all the answers. Use the team around you, and you know, it's not a position of weakness if you haven't got all the answers. There are many people. I don't generally buy into longevity makes you a better leader either. I don't buy into that. You know, I think it's how Jon touched on it earlier on. It's how you work with the skill sets that's around you. Ultimately, as a leader, you have a responsibility and you have accountability as well. But my advice for future leaders is, you know, recognise your own vulnerabilities and your own weaknesses and understand those. And don't be afraid to work on those and recognise those to strengthen in yourself. Don't be afraid to be adaptable. But more importantly is use the skill sets around you, because you'll get to a better outcome. I mean, I've changed my leadership style. You know, from the early days in 1995, I became a crew manager. I've been 30 years in different leadership levels throughout my whole career. And I have to say, through learning from others, also maturing as a person as well, and evolving, I've definitely changed my leadership style. And you know, I try to use the team that's around me now to have involvement, to have ownership, to listen and to understand different views. Ultimately, I'm accountable, and ultimately a decision has to be made, you know, if it's a discussion that way. But by taking on all of the understanding, experience, information around you will, more often than not, lead to a better outcome and the right decision.
Yeah, I think, like you said, but don't be too stubborn to change. And admit when you're wrong. There's no point in like throwing on one path that you're adamant you're right and you're clearly not, and you're going to go with it anyway. You've got to admit when you're wrong and change your tactic. Like you said, you've been big enough to do that.
No, that's
listen
a great
to other
point.
people.
That's a great point, because I think one of our failures in the past with leadership is that bravado that I'm never wrong, and actually not owning up to, I got that one wrong, because we're all human, we do get them wrong. You know, I haven't got everything right. You know, I've got some things wrong. You reflect on those and you try to learn from those experiences. But one of the key things there is don't be frightened to, you know, admit that sometimes I don't get everything right, and that's been an error, I think, in our sector for quite some time. Particularly in senior leadership, there seems to be a reluctance to say, hold your hands up. Yeah, I'm really sorry there. You know, I made an error. But you tend to brave it out and stick it out and stick an adamant, no, that was the right decision, yeah, but that's not mine, you know, and so on and so forth. But there is an element of maturity around recognising that we're not always going to get everything right all of the time.
I totally agree. I think that's one of the things that in my role as training officer, the number of times that I hear, unless that's a training officer, they must know because they train in everything. And I think the first thing I'll say is, if I don't know, I'm going to tell you straight away and not try and hide it. And it's something instilled in new staff as well as part of my role with training, because if you try and cover up a mistake or try and, you know, skirt past it or fudge over it or anything like that, then when you get found out, one, it'd be worse, and it can be critical in our role. So I think, but I really instill exactly what Simon said, that you're a human being. You will make a mistake, but when you make that mistake, it's how you react to it. It's not about, you know, burying your head in the sand or anything like that. So that's a really good point for leadership, is understanding your vulnerabilities, exactly like you said.
Sometimes saying sorry is courageous, as making a decision. You know, in my view, you know, it's one of our values, isn't it? Being courageous, and it takes courage to put your hand up. Particularly high, you know, the more leadership responsibility that you have to say, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that one right.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked a bit before we started the podcast around kind of different generations of people and kind of a newer generation kind of coming into the workforce. And
so for the listeners, we've got generation X, Y, and Z in the room.
we think so.
Millennials.
And so I suppose does that have any impact on kind of the people that are in your teams and kind of the way that you're managing and leading people? We've got different people with kind of different experiences of the workforce, kind of newer people kind of expecting probably more flexible working and different things like that. I wonder if anyone's got any views on that.
Well, my reflections are, when I was new in my leadership journey, you wouldn't question, a more senior person at all. And, if they said jump, how high? Literally, that's how it was at that particular time. Generational changes is, you didn't ask questions, you just do what you're told, get on with it. Generational changes has now, people want to be more involved. They want to be more involved and influential in the future of the organisation, the service. And they want to be engaged with a lot more because they want to feel ownership and they want to set that direction. That's an example of generational shift, and the expectation in the generations in what they want from their employment is changed as well, and what they want from their employer. There are more important things in terms of not just the salary level, but what are the other benefits and workplace advantages. Well-being is a massive area of importance. Work-life balance is another area of massive importance. And you mentioned there, Molly, around flexible working and hybrid working is also an element that people now put quite a large emphasis on as well. And that's just shifted quite a bit since COVID also. Technology, we talked about technology earlier on, that's enabled that ability to be more flexible in your approach to the working environment.
Yeah, jumping back to the question at the start was, for me, it's about valuing everybody's opinion. It doesn't matter about longevity or length of service as particular. It's about valuing the firefighting development as much as somebody's been 20 years and understanding their point of view. And we try that all the time, and I certainly do it on incidents. So speak to the firefighting development and go, what do you think here? And value that opinion. And it might be that they get it wrong or you don't totally agree with it, but you had that conversation about with them. But and not surrounding yourself with people that all think the same, because you come up with the same solution. So it's great having new people coming in from different backgrounds who think differently. So they're going to be able to give you different solutions, and I think that's going to be a real benefit to us going forward.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with everything that Jon and Simon said there, and I think you'd be a fool to disregard an opinion on someone who's new, because exactly you don't know, especially a new person, you wouldn't know a lot about their background, their life experience so far, and again, a good leader would engage with them and say what do you think, and get their opinion. And occasionally there's a real gem that comes out of it, and it can change a process or a way of working, and it's happening because we feed back, you get the buy-in from everyone and the understanding, and it's really, really rewarding to see that process start to finish when someone comes in the idea, and that person will feel so valued, and just that little thing, and it might be a tiny change in a process or anything, but if it's their idea, then that person thinks, whoa, I feel valued myself, and you can see it, and you see them in work, and they're not afraid to speak up about another idea and things like that. So it's really, really great to see this happening across the service.
It does shock them when you first engage them. When you say you're at a fire and the fire's out now, and I remember doing it at a big warehouse. It was just full of smoke, and it was a firefighting development. I was like, I genuinely asking the question to bounce ideas off them. I was like, how are we going to get all this smoke out of here? How are we going to do it structurally? How are we going to do it? And they just looked at me with this bright eyes, just going, "What are you asking me?" I was like, "Yeah." And then we just started talking through it. I was like, "Yeah, that is a solution. Yeah, we could try that." It's quite good to see. But it is about engaging, and then you have that learned culture that we're trying to bring in, where people are free to bring themselves to work, where they're not embarrassed by bringing up a crazy solution. Everyone's involved, everyone's just about it. So.
Yeah, for sure.
There's an element of you got to believe in people as well.
Yeah.
You know, if you see something in, talk about talent and engagement and involvement. It's great. It's an amazing privilege to believe in people and be in a position to put that belief and that trust and allowing people to fly, because there's so much satisfaction in seeing people succeed and thriving in everything that they do, and it just takes someone to believe in you. It just takes someone to take maybe even a little chance on you at times. It's an amazing privilege to be able to do that, and as Jon said there, to ask members of your team, and maybe someone who's only been in a few months or so, a few weeks, or what's your opinion? How would you deal with that? You're putting belief in that person and valuing that they've got something to offer and something to bring, and that pay back dividends. You see the confidence grow in those people, and you're investing them for now and into the future as well.
I think job satisfaction in this service is a huge part of everyone's drive and motivation, and that just helps build it instantly. Early on in the career, you get, like you said, you get that buy-in from that new person and the idea and the discussion, and that builds that job satisfaction massively, in my opinion. And you can see it in their, they come to work the next day and they're
pays back
buzzing.
dividends. Yeah,
100%.
Motivated. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously, we've talked about kind of how leadership has evolved and how the service has evolved. And so it's no secret that, Avon Fire Rescue Service is currently facing some challenges, and we've got work to do to improve as a service, and we know that. But we are making improvements quickly, and we're making changes to things across the organisation to make it a better place to work and to improve the service for our staff and for people that might join the service later on, and for our communities as well. And Simon, I know you're about to retire, but I suppose looking ahead, what do you think some of the kind of challenges or maybe opportunities there are for the service in the next few years?
Yeah, I think if I reflect for the last maybe 8 years, really, since 2017, since we had the Baker report, I think organisationally for 8 years it's been a bumpy road. It's been a road full of potholes. We've felt as though we're making strides forward, and we may take one step forward and two steps back at times. Certainly in my 3 years as being chief officer in the service, even that time has had some potholes in the road. One of the toughest times was the inspection by HMI, and it'd be fair to say, quite a damning report on the organisation, the opinion on the organisation. At the same time, quite a public and painful employment tribunal the service was going through. But if I look back and reflect on those last 8 years, the little incremental changes and differences have got us to where we are today. And I think, if you think that you can't turn things around that have been historic in an organisation in the way that it functions for decades, in a short space of time. And I see this as potentially around a 10-year turnover, if you like, a 10-year kind of change program, improvement program, evolution, whatever you want to label it as that. And I genuinely feel that where we are now is we're probably 8 years since 2017, when very turbulent time for the organisation, very public again. A lot of people that I've just come back to the organisation and I felt it around the service. People were hurting that this is their brand. This is their service. You buy into our service, you really do. It becomes part of you, and then anything that threatens that, is painful to experience. But we work together to go through it, and we work through these things. Now, not everything's perfect every single day, but we're 8 years into that journey, and I do genuinely believe, and I talk to staff around the organisation, we're quite a long way down the road to seeing what I call sunshine on the service again. And I think we are getting much better daily and weekly. And the engagement of staff and the effort for staff right the way across the organisation is plain to see. It's a very different workplace than when I rejoined in 2017 and when I left in 2008, actually. From that perspective, completely chalk and cheese, night and day. And we're almost there. But that's down to the effort and the commitment of everyone right the way across the organisation. But also, I talk less about culture's been a big focus on the Fire and Rescue Service, and we see it all across the sector. We see it in different industries as well when people talk about culture. Culture is how we do things. It's how we are. It's not always bad. It's not always bad. It can be very good and it can be very helpful. It's the heartbeat of any organisation. But I also recognise that not every day is going to be positive for everybody. And I talk about positive workplace experiences, recognising, as I say, that every day is not going to be great. But if you can look back and you can, over a period of time, think, actually, in the main, my experience has been relatively positive. I've been able to contribute. I've been involved. We talked about earlier on about how we're evolving as a service to involve more people in our day-to-day activities. People feel more valued. They feel more listened to. And, there's incremental changes. But I think we're evolving for the positive and on a very positive journey. That's my reflections, although it's taken some time. But you're not going to see those changes overnight in some scenarios. It takes turnover of people. We talked about that autocratic style earlier on of leadership and how a lot of value was put on that. The evolving style of leadership, different generations we talked about. We've got X, Y and Z here in a podcast. So all those things, you've got external factors that are influencing. We've been through a big turbulent time in relation to pay awards, pay disputes, pensions, all emotive things, let alone what else is going on in people's lives and different challenges as everybody has in their lives. So there's a lot of complexity within that, and there's a lot of different dynamics that are playing out. But I generally feel as an organisation, and maybe Jon and Sam might have different reflections, but I think we are on a road to more positive way forward as an organisation.
Yeah, I'd say, I feel you've had a tough tenure with what's come down the line to you as a chief since you've been in the HMI reports that have come through, and fair play for you just sticking through it and putting us on a path to change. Culture doesn't change overnight, does it? And I think anything in the fire service takes a long time to change because it's a vocation. We're in for 30 years. You've got people that are in for 30 years, so those in other organisations people move on and then culture changes a lot quicker. In something that you're in for 30 years, then it takes a lot longer for things to change. So that is one element of culture. But the reports aren't my lived experience, and it's naive of me to think that people don't have a tough time at work, but I don't see it on a day-to-day. It's not been my lived experience of the fire service, but it really upsets me that there's people in our organisation that feel that they've been through that they've had that impacted on their life that way. Because we bring so much of ourselves into this work, you put everything into this job for job satisfaction, and it would pain me to know that people have gone through that trauma at work, and that's annoying. That's real gutting that I'm part of an organisation that people feel like that in. That's my biggest worry about it. But we can only change what's in front of you, and I create that environment with the people that I'm working with to try and change about that culture and make sure everyone feels included. And it's about us all working together to make that happen. And it is changing. I think I don't, like I say, I'm not totally affected by it, but I see that it's changing for the better.
Yeah, me too. And again, I agree that you make a really good point that you're aware that people have experienced bad days and bad periods within the service, and like you said, you're aware of it. There's reports and things like that, and we go through culture change, but I keep coming back, and I'm more than happy to keep coming back. And the reason is because I see the good practice, and I experience it, and I do believe every single year onwards we're progressing in the right path. And again, like Jon said, your tenure might have been had its challenges, and I think the next 10 years will again. But it may be different. But I think that what I've seen in my time, the collaboration now, and since the pandemic, I know it was an awful time for me and lots of people, but there was good things that come out of it that made us work closer together, like teams and different sort of exercises where we work together. And I find it's more than ever now, the collaboration. I know the exercises that happen again across partner agencies as well. We're working together with our fellow emergency service partners and agencies, and the want is much more than it was when I started. You know, like we used to get there and we say, you know, a certain service, they talked about like this service has primacy, and they don't say that anymore. They say lead agency at the incident, you know, and just that little change and things like that, because again, it doesn't mean it's you do what that service says. It's you're working together, and you know, things like I'm a Jessup trainer, and I find it so easy to teach because I fully believe in it. Jessup would be working together with the other emergency services and responders, but it's lots of changes. Like I said about the investment in the staff, there are lots of changes. Like I know me and Jon play football together, which is great, and different departments. There's loads of different departments that play for the service football team. And there's hikes that go on and open days, and everyone gets together, and it's really good seeing.
Those things are invaluable, aren't
I love it, and I'm fully pushing people to sort of get involved with that sort of stuff.
The football team's amazing. It's been a real breath of fresh air. Everyone getting back together. It's been unsuccessful in results, but successful in every other aspect.
You didn't need to put that bit in.
Although we're into the train, it's been really it's successful. Liam Bamford's really sort of pulled us all together, and the fun that happens there, it's just real well-natured. Loads of different departments together there, all there for one purpose, and it's fun. It's about bringing the fun back. Do you know what I mean? It's all part of that culture. Yeah, more things like that.
For me, it almost feels it's togetherness, because we've been through quite a bumpy road. It's almost unified the service in the main together, and that's a prime example. You know, we use a sport analogy in the sports team. We see the rugby team as well. You know, you've got more teams starting to re-establish themselves now, because that's about collectively again, you know, being together as a unity with one shared outcome, whether that be through sport or whether that be organisationally. And it's been such a painful journey in different aspects, depending on which lens that you look through, over the last 8 years, since 2017. It's almost galvanised the service. You know, we're much more closer than what we've ever been between corporate services and different parts of the organisation, from a grey and green book perspective, if we're talking about conditions of service, you know, with more unity and involvement with fire control, and there seems to be this collective desire to the improvement and the evolving of the organisation. So whilst it's been a really bumpy road, and at times personally a very difficult road, very, very lonely at times, I have to tell you, you know, and very challenging when all eyes are on the service at that particular time, both internal and external, and from a political perspective. But it really, I feel it's brought the organisation closer together collectively with one shared desire, and that has started to pay some dividends in our improvement to date. We're always going to be improving. There's always going to be things that need to be done. We're never going to be perfect, but I feel as though we're in a much better and stronger position together. Genuinely believe that.
Yeah.
It definitely feels that way. I've only been in the service 4 years, which, you know, isn't long in terms of the journey that we've been on. But it definitely feels that we're much more connected as a service, and we're much more appreciative of kind of other people's roles and working together more collaboratively. Yeah. Is there any other questions that you wanted to ask?
Well, just a couple. I was just going to say, as you're outgoing as a chief now, I was just wondering which period of time or which rank in the fire service was your favourite period of time? Have you got a time when it was like this is like an LF or?
Oh, great question. Look, I've said before, I've said on a couple of occasions, you know, I lived the boyhood dream for 32 years. All I ever want to do is join the fire service and be a firefighter. I never set out with a career pathway in any way, shape or form, but I have genuinely enjoyed every single role. and every single role has brought their elements of enjoyment. You know, there's places that I hadn't wanted to go, but I went and surprised myself that I enjoyed them.
Yeah,
The stations that I've gone to, though, it's not my first choice, but I've gone there and I've loved it. I've loved the people I've worked with, and all bring different bits. So it's a really difficult one for me to pick out one particular level, because every single one has brought their enjoyment and their challenge. And it has been an utter privilege to lead the organisation, even though it's been a bumpy 3 years. I never set out to be a chief fire officer.
Okay.
And you find yourself in this position, but by crikey, what an absolute privilege, what a proud thing to be able to achieve in your career, and an absolute, I genuinely mean this, I'm all about community services. Me, I've always been about what we're here for, to serve our communities, and an utter honour. And I could probably feel myself getting a little bit, dusty around the eyes, to be honest with you, but it really has. And I've enjoyed every single role, whether they've been challenges in those roles or enjoyment. I really have.
Okay. Where do you see the fire service going in the future? Obviously, the people are saying at the moment that the next 10 years, with the advancements in AI and quantum computing and the rest of it, the advancements in the next 10 years is going to surpass that of the last 50 years. What do you see the fire service looking like in a few years' time?
I think first and foremost, some challenging times before we get there.
Yeah.
I think the next 3 years are going to be extremely challenging from a financial perspective, and how we continue to provide the right level of service that we're all passionate about, and all committed to as well. But I think that's where the technology changes will perhaps move towards a slightly different fire and rescue service that we know now. So data and digital is a massive aspect at the moment. I think artificial intelligence will play some role. I don't think it's the answer to everything. I need to be a little bit cautious about that. But the data and digital element will evolve us again. But fundamentally, it goes back to what we said before, is whilst we can evolve as a sector and almost modernise through data and digital, and what that can bring in advancements, is no replacement for people. Yeah. Particularly in our sector, there's absolutely no replacement for people. And that's going to be the core element right the way through. Standards, professionalism of the sector, a national college, all those sort of things. It's almost falling a little bit in a bit of a circle here, because we had Fire Service College, where everyone used to go to for their set level of qualifications and learning. We moved away from that in 2004, I think, something like that. It's almost like we're going back to that, but there's a little bit more element of standards, professionalism, and that criteria that we must meet. So the next 10 years are going to be interesting. Data and digital will fundamentally start to shape an effective and efficient service, but there is no replacement for people. But I think we're going to have a difficult 2 or 3 years in terms of balancing those that budget against the service that we want to provide to our communities.
I've got a question as well. What's your expectations then of our new chief? I imagine it's such an important role then, and obviously you're going through your handover. So, what if you come back for a visit next year and we've done a different direction or something like that? What's your?
I've engaged with Matt. He's. I think he'd be great for our organisation. I really do. He understands the organisation well, even though he's not been part of the organisation. He's done his research. I think he'll be excellent. He's articulate, he's intelligent, he understands our journey, he's committed to that. My interest is doing whatever I can here today in the last few days of my tenure to ensure that Matt's tenure is as smooth as possible, and he's got all the tools necessary, and I can build all those necessary foundations that I can to make sure that we have sunshine on this organisation once again, that it truly deserves. And Matt's tenure, will be extremely successful, I am sure. And I genuinely wish him every success in the world, because his success is the success of the organisation, and I love this organisation, and that's what I want to see for it.
Lovely.
Well, on that note then, I think that concludes the podcast today. Well, thank you to Jon, Simon, Sam for joining us today, and hope it's been interesting to listen to. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.